Creating a franchise with a cast and a world as immersive and as vast as the modern cinematic universe creates its fair share of challenges and tribulations. As more heroes, entities, and plotlines are introduced, the timeline of the MCU gets increasingly muddied and plot holes become more and more prevalent. Not that this is an inherent issue, it's just par for the course as the Marvel Universe continues to expand. The MCU has actually done an uncanny job at maintaining continuity between the various entries into the franchise, with only a few minor, albeit often highly forgivable, slip-ups. One prevalent issue with this timeline, however, is the inclusion of various real-life mythologies and the implications that their respective iterations of universal history hold truth within the MCU lore, essentially taking elements from the real world, such as the Egyptian gods for example, and implementing them into previously established Marvel Cinematic Universe lore and the creation of the universe as a whole. One particular plot inconsistency arrives due to the recent inclusion of Egyptian mythology with the new Moon Knight series. So stick with us today, watchers of the Marvel Multiverse, and let's explore how Egyptian mythology clashes with the history of directly the Infinity Stones, explain away this plot hole in a few different plausible ways, and finally explore the possible scientific origins of the Egyptian gods by the MCU standards. The issue arises when Stephen Grant draws attention to the Council of Egyptian Gods known as the Ennead, and the inclusion of Khnoshu as an actual tangible entity indicates that these gods are real figures as well, though their exact stories might not be exactly the same as Egyptian lore and myth. The important thing to remember here, however, is that these beings likely have origin stories that vary from how humans have perceived them over the centuries, and this is a trend that is very visible all across the Marvel Cinematic Universe already. In Egyptian mythology, the Ennead played a direct role in the creation of existence, with 5 of these major gods each embodying an aspect of the natural order that is represented on Earth. These gods then assembled the world as the Egyptians perceived it, which clashes with what we know about the Infinity Stones and their origins. In Guardians of the Galaxy, the Collector explains at the dawn of existence that the 6 universal singularities were forged into concentrated ingots, and later in Infinity War, Wong even goes on to say and cite this as the Big Bang itself. While on the surface it may seem impossible for both of these origins to coexist with one another, this is actually quite reflective of the very same real-life dilemma that we face in the real world itself, where conflicting religions and cultures have their own respective explanations for the dawn of the universe and the stories within it, though the MCU indicates that there is a hint of truth to both explanations. With legends of mythology and religion being impacted by the Eternals as well as the Asgardians, it's safe to say that the story of Ennead is simply the human retelling of the tale of what not actually happened, but still some truth to it, as we know that it did actually tangibly exist in the Marvel Universe. The legend of Eckardt, Athena, and Gilgamesh were all named after the Eternals, and entire pantheons of Norse and Greek gods were actually based on advanced beings from elsewhere in the cosmos, and so it stands to reason that the same logic likely applies here with Khonshu, the Egyptian gods, and Moon Knight. From a lore standpoint within the Marvel Universe, this could pose an interesting set of possibilities as to how the Egyptian gods actually came to be, depending on how much each belief is correct by MCU standards. If the Egyptian retelling of events holds merit, then it could indicate that the Egyptian gods might actually be celestials, or at least they could be based on them, as the celestials are cited as the godfathers of the universe and bringers of life. Though it's likely that the Egyptian gods themselves are not actual celestials, they might have told their human avatars the story of creation based on the celestials, only this time taken credit for what the celestials created. In this case, they may have worshipped the celestials as gods and created their own pantheon surrounding this legend, and the actual Egyptian gods that we see and are set to make the remainder of the Moon Knight series might be taking credit for this event regardless of whether or not it was actually them who told these stories. There are a limitless array of possibilities as to how this could happen, and the fallibility of human storytelling is flimsy enough to account for any measure of inconsistency, and we've already seen these numerous times throughout the past of the MCU with characters like the Eternals and the Norse gods. So then, who are the Egyptian gods really? Are they celestials, Eternals perhaps, or something else entirely? As of now, we've only seen one Egyptian god in the flesh, but given that we know the real Egyptian mythology, we can also deduce that these beings might have come from and where they came from, and who in history they might be most closely related to. Perhaps the most iconic trait of the Egyptian gods is their affinity to appear as hybrid beings, usually resulting from the amalgamation of a humanoid and an animal of some kind. Virtually every Egyptian entity and real-life culture is some blend between a human and an animal. While this is a rather unique trait for the MCU to showcase, the Asgardians are not represented in this way, as they seem to be nearly completely humanoid most of the time, and the Eternals likewise are not animalistic in any sense. The Greek gods, however, are a different story, as the gods themselves might not be depicted as hybrid beings, but many of the most common creatures and monsters in ancient Greek culture are depicted very similarly, meaning that there may be a connection here. Satyrs are regular humans from the waist up, but from the waist down they are goats. The seven-headed Hydra as well as the Minotaur are both based on animals that exist here in the real world, and in the Doctor Strange trailer we showcase a live-action Minotaur. When we take into account the likes of Cerberus and the three-headed guard dog of the underworld and the centaurs that are mainstays of mythology, it seems that Greek culture and Egyptian culture share multiple similarities with one another, most notably the hybridization of humans and animals. We also know that the Greek gods and the Eternals as well as the Asgardians are already closely linked together, and we know this due to a few notable lines. First, multiple Eternals regard Thor as a close friend and a former partner in combat, indicating that they know him well. We also know that the Eternals were closely tied to the Greek gods, because Thena was the inspiration for the Greek goddess Athena, indicating that she spent a lot of her time with them and was regarded as one of them, not to mention the story of Icarus originally stemming from Greek mythology. Given this evidence, we can conclude that the oldest pantheons of the gods were in close contact with one another despite coming from various different corners of the galaxy. So is it possible that the Egyptians were included in this collaboration? Well, we think so. If so, is it possible that there are actually several overlapping entities that were perceived differently by the Greeks and the Egyptians? And are there some entities, gods, or beings that exist in different cultures that are actually the same individual? Given the flexibility of human storytelling and their affinity for not seeing the full truth, then it's highly likely that all of these beings were in close communication with one another, and some Egyptian gods are actually Greek or vice versa. While this doesn't necessarily mean that the Egyptian gods are not their own organization, it leaves the door open for overlap between either the Eternals or other gods out there in the Marvel universe. But we are not of course saying that all Egyptian entities are all Greek or the other way around. It is possible, however, that there are some individuals that might coexist between both pantheons, much like Thena and Icarus are both Eternals as well as Greek legends. But anyway, watchers, what do you think of these ideas? What do you think of the minor inconsistency with the Infinity Stones? Where do you think the Egyptian gods come from? And do you think that there are individuals that might overlap with the Greek gods? I know this video was kind of deep, but if you would like to see more videos like this, be sure to leave a like. As always, my friends, thank you guys so much for watching. Hit that subscribe button to assemble and join our team, and I hope you have a great day.